So it turns out that the main challenge in this tutorial is not going to be the modeling or the texturing or anything like that. It's actually just going to be in giving this thing a title, because I can't call it like how to make a and you know what I'm going to say there, because that would be removed from YouTube, or at least I feel like it would be flagged or something. So I got to call it like how to 3D model a boom boom device or something like that. Either way, I don't know what I'm going to end up calling this tutorial, but that's not the point. We are going to be making a and the only prerequisites for this tutorial is check out the CG Matter tutorial I made about LED numbers and timers if you haven't already, because I'm just going to be importing that in as our timer. But then for everything else, we're going to model it and make materials for it ourselves. And the only other thing is go to Google Images and download a picture of a circuit board, since we're just going to be using an image texture. But other than that, let's make a together. So I'm going to be using version 2.93 of Blender. You could use whatever you want. Let's speed run this boy. Okay, so take everything, delete it. We don't need it. I'm going to start off making the circuit board and then everything else. To make the circuit board, I'm going to add in a plane, go to shading, make a material. What kind of material? Basically one that just has the image texture. So again, before even starting, what I did is I went to Google Images, I just typed in like circuit board with timer, and here's one of them I found. You could probably find the exact same one. It was probably the first result. And we have this circuit board, which doesn't really make sense, right? Because like this is probably to control like a lamp or something like that. Like this is like a very tiny circuit board, but we're gonna make it work. Whatever. So first thing I'm going to do is, now that we have this applied on a plane, let's isolate it. So fast way to do this is you could just take some loop cuts to make sure that everything is nice and flat. So take a loop cut, bring it to the side here. I'm basically just describing the bounding box, and you're going to see it's not going to be perfect because everything's a bit diagonal, but it doesn't matter because nobody's going to notice. Just isolate it, select the face, Control I to invert, delete everything else. And we have the circuit board. So what we're going to do here is to make it look realistic, because right now, yes, it is an image on a plane. We're going to model some things in 3D, extrude some of these sections, etc. But just a quick thing we can do in the material right now, just to get free detail, is I'm going to create a normal map based off this image information. So by the way, these node previews on top, it's from an add-on, node preview, link in the description if you care. But you can see we're just going to take this image texture, connect it into the height. This is going to turn it into normal information. That's what bump does. It's going to take the first channel of this, being the red channel, do some derivative approximation stuff, make a normal map, take this, connect it to the normal, and you can see now what we have is a surface that really reacts to our lighting. It looks very jagged and like horrible and like artifacty, but it's reacting to lighting, whereas before it just kind of be a flat plane, right? So add in that detail. To clean this up a bit, take the distance, bring it down. I think I usually take 0.1 and divide it by 3, so 0.033 is what I usually have. This just changes how it's calculated. So we still have some normal mapping, but it's not everywhere and very intense. It only looks at high contrast areas, essentially. Okay, so take the normal map, do the thing. That's just a free way to get detail. But now let's actually model some stuff. I'm going to do this in look dev mode, and let's also save since we have this set up now. We're going to call it Patreon, since it's going to be available on Patreon. Can't say it. B word. I'm going to see if I can go this whole tutorial without saying the B word. Okay, so we have this thing. It has normal detail in material mode once we actually view it. But I want to extrude some stuff, kind of like high silhouette detail. We need to actually change the geometry. So I'm going to take the knife tool, that's K. I'm going to isolate a region. So for example, I'm only picking the super important stuff like this timer, like that's going to matter, right? So I'm isolating this region. So now we have a face that we can control. You take it, you E for extrude, and you bring it up. And I know what you're thinking. It's beautiful. No, some of this stuff is being stretched, this texture. Reason this is happening is because right now this is using a custom UV map. Essentially a project from view map. So let me show you. It's projecting this, but this new geometry is not being included really. It's infinitely thin. So take any new geometry if you ever want to fix it. Take it, U, unwrap, scale it down. So this is now our new faces. You can see we can sample texture. And just take an area that you feel like is representative of what it should look like. So I'm just sampling some gray. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so take this, inset it, extrude it down. I'm just like making the timer face its own thing. And while we're here, since we're going to replace this entirely, again, watch that CG Matter tutorial if you haven't. about the numbers and the alarms. Since we're replacing it anyways, I'm just going to make a material for this as kind of like a stand-in. So I'm going to call this just black, or maybe it's more like a black screen. And to make it assigned to this, you click assign on your selection. And now we have two materials, this one controlling this area. And for this one, it's going to be black, and it's going to be reflective. So take the roughness, bring it down. And now we have a nice little screen timer thing, and we're going to add in the actual digits in a bit. Okay, so the name of the game is we kind of want to put in the least amount of detail that we can get away with. That will, be good enough to make it look 3D. So this is kind of the very lazy tutorial esque way to approach this thing, but it will look real. So what are some details that matter? I think these like big cylinders are things we should model, and I feel like these buttons are things we should model. So let's start off with the buttons. So in edit mode for this mesh, everything I'm adding is part of this mesh. I'm just going to add in a plane, so I'm just basically modeling first and then projecting the texture is the idea. So I'm making a plane that is roughly the bounding box of this thing. Control B to bevel on V for vertices. And this is just going to let me kind of create a rounded square that is going to represent our button. And I could just take this, reposition it, E to extrude, and I think this is a pretty good looking button. So once I'm happy with that, and I'm very happy with it, you project from view, and now we can sample texture. So this is kind of the methodology or the workflow that I'm going to be using for most of this, at least the circuit board portion. So you can see now we've kind of like just bumped this up in 3D. Quick way to, now get detail, and you might think this is going to take a long time. There's a lot of details. No, once you do it once, you can just kind of repeat it. So I'm just literally copying over this geometry, so it's all sharing the same section of UV space. So it will just kind of copy correctly. And if we want to add some variation, like I want this button to look different, you just you select that area. By the way, I'm hitting L to select islands because L means linked. You take this and you could sample different buttons just so that they're not all the same. So you could have this one be this one, we can have it sample this texture. And you can also like rotate it, do a bunch of stuff. But there you go. Also, by the way, I'm not going to do this, I don't think, but if you wanted to actually just isolate the buttons, you do it in the same way we did everything else. You could do it in a fancy way. But I feel like just using the knife tool to isolate this area and then like extrude it up or down or whatever is a fine way to do it. But I don't think that's a detail you're going to be able to see. Okay, so we've made some extra buttons. Let's just make some of the other high detail things like these big cylinders, and then I think we're going to be done. And the cylinders, just like the other stuff, can be repeated. So in edit mode, again, for this mesh, I'm going to add in a cylinder. Let's start off with one of these small, so I feel like there's a lot of cylindrical components here, or circular components. So I'm just going to start with one of them, and then we are just going to kind of repurpose it a bunch of times. And then I think we're going to have enough detail. So just like last time, I'm just kind of modeling this to be what I would imagine that it would look like on top of the circuit board. Of course, I have no idea, right? I'm not a technician. I don't deal. The closest thing I do to circuit boards is the node networks. I follow the logic of like networks. I don't actually make them physically. I don't solder, but I feel like this is kind of what it would look like. I don't need to justify myself. So, by the way, if you want to rotate this, you can just do it like this without actually rotating the geometry. And you could actually add detail where it didn't exist before. So I'm just going to take this and duplicate it. I mean, this didn't exist before here, but now it does. And I'm going to rotate this one to face a different way. And let's start repurposing this. I'm just going to take this, duplicate, scale on everything except the Z-axis, so that's scale, S, and then Shift Z. And I'm just going to isolate this area of the battery. So you project from view, and we isolate the area that it's hovering over. Doesn't need to be perfect. Your eye will guide it. Okay, so that looks good. What else? I'm thinking we should make that cylinder and maybe the things in the corner, and then we can call it a day on the modeling, at least for this stuff. So scale, Shift Z, because I don't want it to be scaling on the Z-axis. Take it, and I guess you don't need to reproject. You can literally just take this and move it to the area where it should be. And you're going to see, you're thinking that I'm crazy right now. It's going to look good. It really will. So there really isn't too much point in investing more time than is like worth it for this. So final thing for the cylinders, and then I'll move on from cylinders, I swear. I'm not going to do all these screws and everything. I'm just going to make the 4 things in the corner since I feel like they're kind of distinctive. So I move that down. Let's sample the thing in the corner, and then I'm just going to duplicate it. I'm not even going to worry about, you know, you making the instances unique. So take that, shift it over, just put it on top. Boop. And again. And again. And look at that. That's a fairly 3-dimensional circuit board. I feel like final thing, and then I will 100% be done. I'm just going to do some of these big details. Not even like correctly, just like roughly to get it correct. So this is like a this is some kind of input-output kind of thing. So then that's usually pretty tall relative to the rest of this. So I'm just extruding it, making a loop cut so I can make some of it taller, like this. And just like last time when your texture gets weird for newly created geometry, we can just kind of like resample. So I'm just selecting this, unwrap. So now we've isolated these things and we can like put them wherever we want. And since it's on top of this like blue IO kind of thing, I could just put it right there and that looks good. Okay, we've done it for that side. Let's do it for this side. Just a little something, a little dab will do ya. This, extrude, loop cut, beautiful. So you can see, you can get some very real, I mean, once we kind of zoom out and put this on the rest of the model that we're going to make, you can get some very realistic detail for very little work. And it's going to really bump the realism, especially once we're in rendered mode and all this. Okay, so we have that. I'm not even going to bother with this box. I think it's fine. So let's see what this looks like. So remember, now we kind of have 2 layers of detail. We don't only have the normal map, but also the geometry. And the geometry is what's actually going to cast these shadows, you can see. But we have a pretty legit looking circuit board. So let's kind of repurpose it for what we need. So for example, in my version, I want my circuit board to be green, and you can try to hunt for an image that looks like this that also has a timer. But since I really like this one, I'd like to make it green. So I'm just going to throw this through a hue saturation. Hue is what changes the color, and I'm just going to pick a greenish shade. So already we've changed the color, easy. And also the saturation, I'm going to bring down a bit because it was a bit of a nuclear green, so I want to say how intense is that color. Okay. I think that is looking fairly decent. I just want to make sure that it looks good in cycle since that's what we are going to render in ultimately. Yeah, looks pretty legit in cycles. So what I'm thinking is let's import in our timer, make sure that it fits in here, and then we'll make the rest of this thing. So again, I'm going to append, since I've already made it, I have this alarm blend file. And in that, I have the thing that I showed you how to make. So if you followed the tutorial or you're on Patreon, you can just get this blend file. You are going to have this object. And what this object does is you can just, from a single input, so we made this whole node network. But from a single input, I could say, oh, it's 235, and then it will put that in with the zeros in the correct place and everything. The only thing this is missing is it doesn't have these 2 dots that separates hours from minutes. So I'm just going to add that in because I didn't show that in the original, so I'll just add it in here. So here's the image sequence that I made from this custom font of all the numbers. I just kind of did the same thing, but I made this like colon image. Not like, you know, that kind of colon, but whatever. You can just import that in, make your own, or you could just make these 2 dots procedurally, but whatever. I'm just going to add them in, and then literally add them in. So I just do this whole chain. That's a black and white factor map. I add these in to include them. And let's see. So they're not showing up because our texture space is super weird. Like, remember, we made these very weird UV coordinates. I'm just going to use a modified object coordinate for this. So you can see now our dots are showing up, but too many times. So I'm just going to clip so it doesn't repeat. So here they are. And now all I have to do is transform them. So mapping node is going to let us remap the position. So you could be like, oh, I want it here. I want it to be bigger. This is the kind of thing that's easier from top view. And you just want to make sure that it looks good. no matter what your input is. So it looks good for 235, but if I make it like whatever 1215, is it still centered? Yeah, I think that's kind of in the correct place. It could be like a bit more to the right, but I think that's fine. Okay, so we've added in the dots, and somehow we want to take this mesh that, you know, we have control over and put it in where it's supposed to be. So first obvious thing to do is you kind of scale it and position it inside your timer window. But even if we like kind of nestle it right where it should be above our screen object, it still has like all this stuff. We just want to keep this text and not any of the background. Well, because the way this is set up, even with the added added colon, because of how this is set up, it's basically just a black and white image. So what we can do is we want to make the black part transparent and the white part emissive. You know, it should be glowing, right? It's LEDs. So I'm going to add in a transparent BSDF, also an emission BSDF. Mix those two together. How should they be mixed? Well, using this factor map. Connect it. Beautiful. So again, it's going to be transparent wherever it's black, and where it's white, we have emissive control, and it should be red, and it should be fairly bright. Okay, so I'm going to take this and kind of hover it right over, if not slightly above, so we get this tiny bit of a mirroring effect because we have a reflective screen, remember. And I think that's going to look pretty good. The brighter it is, kind of the closer to white it will be, and it will kind of look like it blends in a bit more. But I think that is fairly decent. So I'm going to take this. I'm not actually going to join them, because if you join them, weird stuff happens because of the way this is constructed, basically because of object coordinates. But because of that, I'm just going to take these, parent them to each other, so when I move one, it moves the other. And now we have a nice way to control it. It's now 222 or whatever. Okay, so other than making tiny modifications to this, like picking a color that I feel like fits a bit better, etc., I think we're done with the circuit board portion. So let's include some other stuff. So I'm just going to set up our scene. I'm going to load in an HDRI instead of just having that boring light, so we can actually see what this is going to look like. So get rid of the lights, film, transparent. So I guess this is what it would look like in this very bright environment, and you can test it out with other HDRIs. But I think I like the look of this one the most. I don't know. We can go back to it. Either way, circuit board needs some thickness. I'm going to do this in a look dev mode, because right now it's like this thin plane with stuff puncturing it. So I'm just going to select the boundary and extrude it downwards, just so it has a bit of thickness. And then I guess I could make it lower, and then F for fill. Don't worry about what's on the underside of this. But that makes a nice circuit board. I'm thinking, though, now that we're here, before we start making the rest of this, I do want to add one tiny detail that I think is really going to take this to the next level. So I guess let's just do it. I want to add in sections of this that are metallic, like this is a metal, this is a metal. So I want some areas to shine and reflect differently than others. So I'm just going to add that in. And then and I think it will be valuable to learn how to do that. And then we'll move on. So I'm going to make an image texture. I'm going to call this one, so I'm making a new one, hasn't existed before. I'm going to call it circuit metal, and that's going to be our metal map. And by the way, I recently saw this movie. It's like known as a classic gore horror thing. It's called like Iron Man. It's a Japanese movie, I think. Super gross. Super gross. I didn't know what was going on either. Take these two, mix them. It says, by the way, this is a node preview thing. It says that we should save the image before we can view it. So go to circuit metal, which is a blank image right now, and I guess save it on the desktop. So now it should be able to load that in. Huh. Maybe it needs to load it in like this. Doesn't like that. Either way, what I'm doing here is I'm just mixing these two together so that when I write something on the metallic map, it's actually going to be visible. So what I mean by this is we're going to go to texture paint. I'm going to paint on a single image. What kind of image? On the circuit metal. Let's look at this through look dev. And I think the way I've set this up is now when I paint, you can actually see it on top. The reason this is happening is because we're painting on this image and I'm mixing it on top of our diffuse channel. If you didn't do that, it would just be black and you'd have to guess where the thing is. Either way, what I'm doing here is I'm just isolating the areas that I feel like would be Metallic doesn't need to be accurate. This is just going to give it a tiny bit of a detail boost. So I feel like even doing it incorrectly is going to be useful. But you can use this to drive not only like metallicness values, but also like roughness. You can say like these metal areas maybe, and I don't know if this is correct, but maybe should be a bit shinier. I don't know. By the way, since some of these things like this section and this section share the same UV island, when I painted one, it paints both of them. So some of the stuff comes for free. So I'm just going to paint this, maybe this screw area, this one. You could do the rim here. I'm not going to mess with that too much. And basically I've just picked the metal that's easy to paint. I mean, you could go in here and be like, oh, this is a little metal strip, and so is this and this and this, but whatever. Okay, so let's take this and resave it. Circuit metal. If it doesn't like overriding it with a node preview, we can just give it a different name. So let's see. Image texture, load in this custom map we made, connect it on top. Yeah, so that's on the same regions. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use it as a metal map. So take this new thing we made, connect it to the metallic thing, and now you can see these sections are kind of a bit darker and actually kind of reflecting metal a bit more. And it looks better. So here's the before and after. Focus on these areas. Okay, so we got that. You can also mess with the roughness, make it more or less shiny. But now let's make the rest of this thing. So now that we have the circuit board, we just got to make the dynamite stick. So what I'm thinking is we add in a cylinder. And you could make it a high-res cylinder. I don't know. Make a cylinder, scale it, rotate it, do whatever. I'm just positioning it roughly where I think it should be. And I feel like, yeah, something like that. And a bit bigger, a bit longer. We could do this in look dev so it doesn't lag. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Before I start copying these and making 7 of them, I'm just going to make sure that we do our beveling before that so that we don't have to kind of repeat this. By the way, if you're beveling or insetting or something like that does this weird thing where it's kind of like not in proportion to the thing, it's because you need apply scale. So you just take this, Control A, all transforms, or really I guess just rotation and scale. Once you do that, the bevel will work normally again. Quick tip. Okay, so I'm just going to model the basic stick, and then I think what I found out is it's literally just this. So you put one below it, and then you kind of honeycomb around it. So it should look like some kind of hexagon or octagon or something like that once it's done. So it should be 7 altogether with 1 in the center. You take these, you add in a bit of randomness, so some of them are going to be here, some of them is going to be here, just varying up the position a bit. And I'm going to take these, and let's join them into a single mesh so that it's easier to interact with them. I'm going to take them, that is now a single mesh, and I'm just going to rotate and position so that it's sitting on a flat 2 of them. Okay, beautiful. To give this thing a material, it's kind of up to you. I went for a very cartoony thing where it's kind of red and maybe a bit dark, something like that. This is the very like traditional cartoon version of this, but I like the way it looks. So I made it red, and to add in a bit of detail, almost as if it's covered in fabric, since that might be how it keeps all the gunpowder or everything inside, I just used a noise texture using something like object coordinates. So now we have a noise texture here, and just like before with the circuit board, I'm just using this free detail to generate a normal map for us. And what this is going to end up looking like is fabric or rock or something like that. So to make it look better, I'm going to take the scale, bring it down, take the detail, bring it down, and yeah, that looks good. So pick kind of like a wavy pattern that you like by messing with these numbers, and then you take the normal map and you make it less intense. So this is kind of like the amplitude of the displacement that's normal map based. But you can see this makes it look much more like real. Before, after, distorts the normals. Okay, so we have that, and we can go back and fix that. But I also want to make these straps that kind of connect everything together. To do that, I'm just going to add in a mesh being a single vert. If you don't have this extra objects add-on, it's free. You just go to Edit Preferences, you enable it, or you could just make a plain delete 3 vertices. Either way, I'm going to add a single vertex, so you can see there it is. Single vertex, position it somewhere, I feel like, I don't know, here. Edit mode and vertex mode. You just E to extrude. And I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roughly, you could do this with curves as well. I'm just going to roughly kind of trace out the bounding box. I don't know how to describe it. You kind of outline where the strap would be. And it doesn't need to be that accurate since we're going to take this. We're going to then bevel on vertex and C to clamp. So something like that. Although maybe I want to take as much room as possible. Something like that. You make the strap. To make it now fit a bit better, you go to proportional editing. So yeah, we can do a second pass. Proportional editing is going to let us move these in a way that it's kind of like elastic in a sense. So I'm just moving these, rotating them, positioning them so they're kind of where they would be if this was really a strap. Something like that. It should be really hugging the very exterior of this. So something like this. You can go back and clean this later. But do something like that. Once you've made this kind of ring, you extrude it on the X, I believe, axis. And that's going to make our strap. 1, duplicate. 2, rendered mode. And now we got a way to bundle these bad boys together. And just like before, we're just going to give this a simple material. So this is kind of like, in my head, kind of like a darkish, brownish leather. So I'm just going to pick this and let's apply this material here as well. So we could call this one like leather or something like that. And just like before, I'm just going to use a noise texture, not a white noise. That's problematic. I'm going to use a noise texture to basically drive this, except this time, much smaller scale. So you can see we have very fine detail. I'm going to take this, run it through a bump node in the height. That's going to convert it into normal information. You know the drill by now. So this is going to give it a very leathery look. What I like to do is make it a very big number, like I did, and then really start decreasing the normal amount. Just so it's there, but it's not 100% visible. So you can see it kind of looks leathery, but when I zoom out, it's not like that intense. Maybe I'll make it a little less so. Okay. I like the look of that. Really, the rest of this is kind of like playing around with color and stuff like that. I feel like the red is still a bit crazy. So I'm going to bump up the roughness. Let's add a bit of detail to these dynamite sticks. They look a bit boring. One way to make them not boring is let's add in a bit of dirt. Why not? Easy enough. So noise texture. Again, we're using noise for everything. Object coordinates. This is basically going to be our dirt map. And what I'm thinking is we can just make 2 principled BSDFs. One of them is the red one. One of them is going to be the one that's dirt. And I'm just going to mix them using this as the factor. So you can see right now it's kind of, both of them are peeking through. But to control kind of the look of this, I'm just going to color ramp. So this is, again, defining where things exist. So I'm just going to make a nice sharp matte. So right now it's going to look like this. And I want it to look a bit more, dirty. So I'm going to bump up the detail, bump up the roughness. This is what makes it look like a dirt that's accumulated and stuff. And let's see what that looks like. We might need to invert these. We'll see. So I'm just playing around with these sliders. I don't want the dirt to be 100% too visible, and we can also change some of these settings here. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so that looks, let's make this more of a dirt BSDF, so it needs to be kind of a darker blackish brown. It should be high roughness, not very reflective. And this tells me that we need higher contrast here. So you can play around with this, you get different kinds of looks, but I'm going with something like this to add a bit of dirt on top. And I think that looks fairly decent. I think it looks better than if we didn't add it. So before, kind of way too, cartoony. After. If anything, though, I would like it if kind of like the base level wasn't as much. So let's see. I feel like if I take this and bring it up, yeah. So basically one of these is saying what's the minimum condition and one of them is what's the maximum condition. I'm going to take the minimum condition and just bring it up. And that's just going to kind of make it a bit more red everywhere. But you can see, okay, we have a bit of dirt. Looks legit. Let's see, what else do I want to do with this? I'm just going to scale this, kind of reposition it, rotate it so it doesn't look exactly perfectly placed. Okay, let's start parenting things. So this strap, this circuit board, all of them going to be attached to this. So now we have this system where when we move this, it kind of moves everything. And by the way, these kinds of things tend to look much, much more realistic, by the way, when you put them in like some kind of scenery and it's reflecting, you know, the conditions of it. So I just want to note that. It's kind of weird when it's hovering in space. Okay, we have all this. I'm thinking final touch, and it's not really a touch. It's kind of like a necessity. Cables. We're going to need to add in some cables. And what I found is in the cartoon images I looked up while I wait for LookDev to... it usually had 2 to 3 cables just going to one end of it, so nothing crazy. So I'm thinking we add in a Bezier curve. We have one end of it be here, kind of like coming out of this USB socket, you know, whatever. It's coming out of the USB socket, and it's going to terminate at the center rod, kind of pointing inwards. Okay, so to clean this up, I'm going to add in much more geometry, or many more divisions. I'm going to subdivide this so we actually have another control point. Let's add another. And I'm just going to make this cable look a bit more chaotic. And I think the way these cables look typically is they're very stiff. Like they can hold kind of weird positions. So I'm just going to move this down here, this down here. This one can go up. Just make it look kind of chaotic and a bit random or something. Okay, that looks good. Just to test it, geometry, object, or no, round, and increase the depth is going to give it some thickness. Make sure everything is going where it's supposed to. So this is going to kind of like intersect the circuit board. And you know what I could do is, since I know this is a area that's important, you could be like, oh, chick, chick, chick. This is like the input-output port. So I'm just going to like extrude it and bevel it. Doesn't make much sense, but I think it will make it visually, you know, better. Okay, we have the curve. Let's give it a, let's give it a material. I'm going to call it cable. And for the cable material, I'm just going to take it and make it black and not very reflective. Let's see what that looks like. That looks legit. And then to get some more cables very quickly, you go into edit mode of this one again, just adding onto this object, and I'm just going to add in another curve. So this one is going to be kind of like going parallel with it, but just kind of taking a slightly different path to get there. So they're both going to terminate at the same point. I just want it to, you know, take a different path. So L, again, to select linked, subdivide a couple times, and just make this one look a bit different, I guess, however you want to do that. So here, here, this one can go out and rotate and be scaled. There we go. And I just want to make sure these terminate at the same height on the z-axis and that they begin on the same height on the z-axis. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. You can add in more wires, but I think that looks pretty legit. So again, it's the stiff wires that I found is the look. I think other than that, just for my preference, I'm just gonna, whoops, I guess I should do this in edit mode because of all the parents. I'm just gonna make this a bit smaller. Maybe not that small. Something like that. And then I got to make sure that the cables, again, connect. Something like that. Take the curves. Take these 2 points. Proportional editing, so it kind of moves everything. Is that connecting? Yeah. I feel like it looking a bit more closed and bundled together goes more for the look that I want. And everything should still be parented. No, the curves aren't parented. Parent the curve to the body. And there we go. So let's see. Right now we have this mesh that is all connected to a single control point. We have a lot of procedural textures and stuff like that going on. But most importantly, these numbers we can control. So let's make a bit of a countdown. So we have 59, let's say. And because of the way this node network works, it's pretty simple. You put in a number and it exists, you know. So you could add in a keyframe, and then like over 120 frames, it's going to count down to 1 or something like that, or to 0. And let's make these keyframes linear, so it goes at a constant speed, and let's see if that's working. I could see one thing that goes wrong. So that's going down. So I think, let's see. Yeah, one issue is the 10 gives us a 0. Don't worry about, for a technical reason, if you have this issue, just take this number and do a ceiling or a floor. It's just going to round it. That's going to fix it. So we go from 11 to 10 to 9. Either way, you can just keyframe this super easily, and that can move with or without. And the rest of making this look good is basically, putting it in a scene, lens distortion, depth of field, you know the drill. Okay, so here's kind of the finished project that I made with nice lighting, and it's very dynamic, and there's stuff going on in compositing nodes, etc. Long story short, it's the same thing. I just cleaned it up, put it in a basic environment, and now we are going to render it with concierge render. Why? Because it's a render farm, and it's going to render substantially faster. And I mean, that's it. It's going to render much faster than you could do on your computer, and fairly cheaply too, which is the point. So I am here to tell you about concierge render, and here's how you set up the blend file before you send it. So whatever project you have, in this case I have this, can't say the word still, project, here's how we set it up. So only two things you need to do. First of all, go to File, External Data, and if you haven't already, click this button. What it does is it packs the HDRIs, any image texture used, whatever, into the blend. You need those. Second of all, and this is just advisable, clean up and go through all of these. So clean up your data blocks that you're not using, etc., just so your blend file isn't as big. So you do that, you save it, and then I am going to meet you at Concierge Render to upload it. And we are here at conciergerender.com, where if you have not made an account, I already have, but if you didn't, make one, and you get $5 in free render credits, which sounds like not a lot, but sometimes that's a full render. So get that free render credit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into my account. I've already made one, and I already have some funds in my account. Either way, what you want to do is upload the blend and tell Concierge Render to render that blend. So let's upload and launch renders, for which one we click upload files, and you can just upload the blend directly. So mine is called timer. So it's just going to upload it. Again, I have the HDRIs, the textures, and everything packed into it. So you can see it's loaded, it exists here, and now all we need to do is launch it. So go to Actions, go to Launch Render. It's going to think about it for a second, and then we're going to pick all the settings, like what version of Blender are we using, etc. And here are the settings that we need to pick. I mean, most of them are fine by default. So what version of Blender? I made it in 2.93, I believe, so I'm going to keep it at 2.93. Generally, picking the newest one, probably advisable. For the render engine, it's set to cycles because I have it in cycles. And by the way, a lot of these things, and by the way, I'm a render and animation, a lot of these things are pulled directly from the Blend project. So for example, I had it set to 250 samples. It was a 180 frame animation. So if you already set those settings there, you don't need to do it here. Okay, in animation, I want to render frames 1 to 180 at the native resolution, which happens to be 1080p. That's what I picked. 250 samples, fine. Go to hardware, pick what speed do you want to choose for what price. Like, long story short, the further you go down this list, the way faster it gets, but also the bit more expensive since, you're using better hardware. For my projects that need to be rendered fast, but not like lightning fast, I just pick the standard option. I think it's a good balance. So once you have all this set up, you just click render. It's going to take those settings and then create a render job that we can see at the job manager. You go to view details, and what it's going to be doing here is giving us a bunch of data saying that stuff is getting ready, and then as stuff's rendering, it's going to show up here. So I'm going to cut to when it has rendered our project. Okay, so the render is complete. You can see all the frames over here. So here's like, I don't know, frame 60. And let's wait for that to load a little preview. So yeah, you can see it rendered basically what I gave it. And you can download these one by one, or download outputs. Most importantly, is this information. How much did it cost? How long did it take, etc. Long story short, doesn't cost much considering it's a 6-second animation, so that's 180 frames at 30 frames per second. And also, I don't know what the other thing I was going to say is. Takes less time than rendering it on a single computer is probably what I was going to say. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You learned how to make a and yeah, thanks for watching.